Bonjour les élèves. Today we're going to talk about le passé composé des verbes pronominaux, or the past tense of reflexive verbs. Okay, d'abord, une petite révision. Let's review what we know about the passé composé. We know when we take a present tense sentence like this, and we put it in the passé composé, we have to have a helping verb and a past participle. Here we took he has a test and made it he had a test by taking the passé composé of the verb avoir, putting the helping verb avoir in front of the past participle. And then we also remember that some verbs, like the verb aller, take être as a helping verb. So here, instead of he goes to the park, he went to the park. And we also remember that with the passé composé and those verbs that take être as a helping verb, we have to add an extra e or s or e and s to make the past participle agree with the subject when the subject is feminine, feminine plural, or plural. Now, we also have learned that in sentences where we have the passé composé with an object pronoun, the object pronoun goes in front of the helping verb. So instead of he has it, to say he had it, we took the it, put it in front of the helping verb avoir. And then also remember that when you have sentences where you have an object pronoun and the passé composé, you have to make that past participle agree with direct object pronouns. All of that is going to come to play when we talk about the passé composé with reflexive verbs. Okay, so when we have a reflexive verb in a sentence, the helping verb is going to be the verb être. So all along I've said there's only those 17 verbs that take être as a helping verb. Well, I haven't exactly told you the complete truth, because those 17 verbs and reflexive verbs take être as a helping verb. So don't think that I was lying to you. I just wasn't completely telling you the whole truth. So I want you to take a look at these sentences. If we say Richard s'est levé à 6 heures, Richard got up at 6 o'clock, or Anne s'est levée à 6 heures, Anne got up at 6:30, or je me suis brossé les dents, I brushed my teeth, or nous nous sommes dépêchés, we hurried ourselves. You can see in these sentences that the reflexive pronoun goes before the helping verb. You also might notice that in some of these sentences we have agreement, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But for right now, you might just want to write down that when there is a reflexive verb and the passé composé, the helping verb is going to be être, and the reflexive pronoun goes before the helping verb. Alright, moving right along. Since these are reflexive verbs, remember, I got ahead of myself, that there's going to be a reflexive pronoun in each of the sentences. Something that we've never talked about is that reflexive pronoun is either going to be a direct object or an indirect object. A while back this year we've talked about direct object pronouns, le, la, and les, indirect object pronouns, lui and leur, so you kind of have an idea of what a direct object is as opposed to an indirect object, but you've never really stopped to think about the fact that a reflexive pronoun can either be a direct object or an indirect object. So let me have you look at a couple of examples. In this sentence, Marie s'habille, Marie gets dressed. That S apostrophe, which actually means herself, Marie dresses herself, that S apostrophe is a direct object. But if you look in this sentence, Marie s'achète une robe, Marie is buying a dress for herself, that S apostrophe, which again means herself, is this time an indirect object. The first sentence, Marie is doing this action directly on herself. But in the second sentence, she's actually buying the dress, so une robe, is a direct object. And the S apostrophe, she's doing the buying for herself. So she's not buying herself, but she's buying something for herself. So, if the reflexive pronoun is a direct object, the past participle must agree with the subject pronoun. That's why when I showed you those first couple of example sentences, some of them had agreement and sometimes they didn't. This is definitely something that you want to write down. Reflexive pronouns will agree, or the direct object let me back up. The past participle must agree when this reflexive pronoun is a direct object. So let me show you some examples because I kind of stumbled over my words. In this sentence, Marie got herself dressed. Since that S apostrophe, like we just talked about, is a direct object, we have to add an extra E to the verb habiller because she did this, passé composé, directly to herself. So the past participle agrees with the subject if the reflexive pronoun is a direct object. Here's another example. Les enfants se sont lavés. The children washed themselves. In this sentence, they are directly washing themselves. So we add an extra S to the verb laver because the past participle must agree with the subject when the reflexive pronoun is a direct object. If the reflexive pronoun is an indirect object, the past participle does not agree. And remember, indirect objects are when the action is not done directly onto them, but they benefit, or the action is done to them, but something else might receive the direct action. So in this sentence, Marie s'est acheté une robe. Marie bought herself a dress. Notice there's not an extra E on the verb acheter because that S apostrophe is an indirect object. And past participles do not agree with the subject when the reflexive pronoun is an indirect object. And here she was buying the dress for herself. We have that extra little preposition, for herself, in this sentence. Here's another example that I think really explains it a little bit better. Les enfants se sont lavés les cheveux. Now in the first example with direct objects, there was laver. In this case, there is not, because les cheveux is actually receiving the action. They are washing their hair. So while, yes, their hair is attached to them, it's the hair that is specifically receiving the direct object. It's kind of an unwritten rule, but basically if there's another noun after the verb that is receiving the action, then you will not have agreement. And that's kind of a rule that I usually tell people so that you can kind of look, oh yes, in this sentence I see les cheveux follows the verb, so then I do not need to have agreement. Whereas if you had just the other sentence, les enfants se sont lavés, there was nothing that followed laver, so agreement did have to take place there. Okay, in negative sentences, just real quickly, last little point here, ne and pas is going to surround both the reflexive pronoun and the helping verb. So here's an example. Nous ne nous sommes pas écrits. We did not write to each other. I would point out here that ne goes before nous, pas goes after some, so it surrounds both the pronoun and the helping verb. And going back to the whole agreement thing, notice on the past participle, écrit, there's not an S there because we were writing to each other. And so that nous is actually an indirect object, and no agreement happens with when you have a reflexive pronoun that is an indirect object. Here's another example. Tu t'es levé à bonne heure. You got yourself up early. If I were going to make this negative, and I kind of like to see if you could do that on your own, think about where the ne and the pas would go. Maybe you write it in your notes with the negative sentence. And I'll have you check it here in a second to see if you're right. And then I would also notice the agreement here. We do have an extra E because if you get yourself up, we're obviously talking to a girl here, that is a direct object. You directly do that to yourself. Also, you can see there's not an actual noun after the verb lever to directly receive the action. But if you were going to make this sentence negative, it would look like this. Tu ne t'es pas levé à bonne heure. Okay, I know there's a lot in this, and this might be some notes that you have to go back and rewind and listen to a little bit or a few times because it is kind of complex and confusing. We'll work with it a lot in class just to make sure you have good notes written down so that you can take a notes quiz over this in class. Au revoir les élèves.